Art the Clown made his first on-screen appearance way back in 2009 in Damien Leone's short film The Ninth Circle, and then again in 2011 with the short film Terrifier, both of which were included in the 2013 anthology film All Hallows Eve, which is around the time I personally became aware of him. In 2018, Art the Clown's first ever full feature-length appearance would be widely released after a festival circuit starting in 2016, and the feature-length Terrifier would bring a lot more attention to this maniacal silent killer, making him a more recognizable figure among horror fans. A sequel was inevitable, and as the build-up for Terrifier 2 continued to grow, it looked like Art was about to really make a name for himself in the community. One viral tweet about someone passing out at a showing of Terrifier 2 later, and Art the Clown was catapulted from being an underground grindhouse killer to the most iconic horror villain to be introduced since Ghostface in 1996, and with Terrifier 3 on the horizon, it doesn't look like he'll be slowing down anytime soon. Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rocklin Graves. It's been very cool to watch Art the Clown become more and more well-known over the years, and considering he's plastered all over places like Spirit Halloween and Spencer's now, I think it's safe to say he's made quite a name for himself among horror fans, even transcending the genre itself and being recognized by people who aren't even into horror, even if they may not know his name or where he comes from. There's no question that Art the Clown has become a horror icon, and while he gained notoriety in his earlier appearances, it really was Terrifier 2 that sent the character into the stratosphere. While the first Terrifier was notable for the absolutely insane kills and Art the Clown's wonderfully creepy, charismatic performance, beyond the grindhouse aesthetic, there really wasn't much more to that movie. The story wasn't one, and the characters were fleshy meatbags for Art the Clown to showcase his creativity with, so while I can appreciate what the movie did, it's not one that I've ever found myself all that taken by because there just isn't much to it. It's a great showcase of Art the Clown, and that's about it for me. Terrifier 2, on the other hand, well, this is one of my favorite horror movies ever. After proving there was potential with this character and gaining enough popularity from that first movie to crowdfund the sequel, the increased budget and ability to focus more time on Terrifier 2 resulted in an odyssey of a slasher movie, or as Mike Flanagan quite aptly put it, a mega slasher. Taking the ridiculously over-the-top gore and charismatic killer clown into a story jam-packed with mystery and intrigue and religious imagery and a cast of characters that's way more fun to spend the colossal 2-hour and 18-minute runtime with, as well as introducing one of horror's best final girls with Sienna Shaw. Terrifier 2 was the movie that Damien Leone had in mind for Art the Clown since 2008, before he even made The Ninth Circle. It just took a long time before he was able to get the funding that this long-time dream project would require, and he finally got to make it a reality. Terrifier 2 is a massive accomplishment, not just for Leone as a creative who was reading books by and listening to screenwriters talk about the process of writing while he spent 3 straight months working on the script for this project, which is so wholesome to me, but it's also a huge win for horror and indie filmmaking in general. It's a genuinely heartwarming story to see someone who had a dream film in mind for so long finally get to make it and have it be such a massive success. Made on a modest budget of $250,000, exceeding the initial crowdfunding goal 5 times over, the film would go on to gross over $15 million internationally at the box office, making back 60 times its budget. Terrifier 2 is something to be celebrated whether or not you personally enjoyed it. Myself, I love this movie, so let's get into a video that I've been wanting to make for almost 2 years now and take a look at the slasher odyssey of Terrifier 2. The film opens directly tying itself in with where the first left off, with Art in the mortuary attacking the mortician, and the movie lets you know right away that it's delivering on and exceeding the precedent set by the first movie's over-the-top gore. You pop in that Terrifier 2 disc and it says, "I'm here, bitch, strap in." For the majority of the first film, there weren't any hints of Art being supernatural, despite that being made quite clear in the earlier shorts featuring the character. It wasn't until the final scene of Terrifier that any indication of the supernatural is present, and with that being established, Terrifier 2 takes that supernatural reveal and goes all in on it, starting off right away with there being some air of evil around Art as a sourceless wind blows through the mortuary. We're sitting in the settling dusts of something very significant taking place, with Art the Clown being resurrected by an entity that we meet soon after he takes out the Mortician in brutal fashion. This sequel has a hell of a lot more story going on in it than its predecessor, but by the end of the runtime, you're left with a lot more questions than answers. One of the things that I find really compelling about Terrifier 2 is that very thing, where I'm left wondering so much about what things meant and looking forward to learning more about the mythos in future entries. Whether or not you enjoy being asked to ponder stories or piece together meaning in vague symbolism is going to be a huge deciding factor in whether or not you enjoy the narrative presented in this movie. I'm a huge Souls fan, so I'm personally very drawn to this kind of thing and enjoy theorizing and trying to connect the dots through hazy lines, so I never found the vague nature of the movie's story frustrating, but I know that many did. The movie starts raising these sorts of questions very early on with the arrival of the little pale girl, who acts as Art's sidekick throughout the movie. Originally, Leone had designed the character as a very sweet young girl with a yellow sundress and a sunflower behind her ear, sort of evoking a 60s quaintness with her look. That all changed after the release of Terrifier and the huge influx of cosplayers trying their hand at embodying Art the Clown, and it was the vast sea of female cosplayers doing their own spin on Art's design that changed Leone's mind on the design of this character. I think that really shows his dedication to the fans of this franchise and his understanding of the horror community, knowing that if he can pay homage to the way that his audience responded to his work and design a character after their own love letters to it, it's gonna resonate in a really special way. That's something that I really appreciate about this franchise. The people involved with it have their finger on the pulse of the fan base and are more connected to them than a lot of larger franchises can be. There's a fun connection that's been built up between this team and the fan base, and I think the little pale girl is a great reflection of that. Her character is a great example of how Terrifier 2 asks the viewer to pay really close attention and piece together meaning through visuals and symbolism, and it's not like the answers aren't there if you go looking for them. There are three big indicators that help us come to a conclusion about the nature of this character. One is the glowing yellow eyes that we see a few times throughout the movie, which come back at the end when we see the possessed Victoria, communicating that whatever the little pale girl is has essentially transferred into Victoria's body and has now possessed her. Another is this newspaper we see talking about a young girl who was found murdered at a carnival. Her name's Emily Crane, and seeing the photo of her, it's clear that this is the same person. Sort of. Whatever entity this is taking the form of who seems to be Art's first victim to try and gain his trust, which is another puzzle piece we can use to try and figure all this out. We don't know what the entity actually looks like, but we see it take this form and then later possess Victoria. In terms of this entity's role in the story, that's where we still have some questions that need answering. We don't have much in the way of anything for motivations for the entity yet, but what we do know is that throughout the course of the movie, it essentially guides Art, bringing him in contact with people who are close to Sienna to try and break her by killing off those closest to her. It's unclear if Art is aware of why the entity is guiding him, or if he's just going along because he loves figuring out new ways to design fine art pieces with the flesh of innocent people. He's likely in on some of whatever's going on, but it's certainly possible that there's also more that he's not aware of that could come around later on down the line. It's cool to see this other side to him, having another playful little bud to hang out with and play pranks like doing insanely good Elliot Fulham impressions.
I'm at the old carnival. Eric and Sean left me here.
God, the look on his face, I absolutely adore how much Thornton is able to deliver this kind of thing. This entity certainly knows how to appeal to Art, as we see when he first encounters it and seems a little unsure of what to think. It's interesting to see him around a character that doesn't immediately fire off his creative mind to think up some horrific way to kill, and he's instead drawn in by the strange nature of this thing, recognizing the face of Emily and also seeing how it seems to reflect what he looks like. The entity greets Art by expelling some shit blood brown sludge stuff out of excitement, like a dog who pees on the floor when their owner has been out of the house for a while and walks through that front door. Art likes shit. We know that Art likes shit, so it makes sense that if you want to win him over, then shit. Shitting is your best bet. A quick tip for anyone who's single and having a rough time out there, this is exactly how I introduce myself to my girlfriend, so give it a shot. It's worth it. On top of setting up this partner for Art to tag along with, this scene is also here to establish an important detail about this entity. It seems at first that it can only be seen by Art himself, as this onlooker in the laundromat only sees Art playing patty cake alone, but what this rule also does is adds another question within the lore later on when we learn that Sienna and Jonathan can also see this entity, which is one of the main details that establishes some sort of connection between the Shaw family and Art himself. Speaking of the Shaw family, let's talk about the other characters in Terrifier 2, because unlike the first movie, there's actually a lot to talk about where that's concerned.
You were up until 4 o'clock in the morning, working on that Halloween costume.
The central character in this film is Sienna Shaw, who, following the release of this movie, has become an icon for final girls in horror, which is not an honor that's usually bestowed on people who've only played a final girl once. She's not quite your typical Laurie Strode-esque archetype, which I think is one of the big reasons she's resonated so much with people. Sienna is played by Lauren Levera, who Leone said was his pick for the role right away and that there really were no runner-ups for her, and I can absolutely see why that is. Sienna is a character that Leone has had in mind since 2008, and Lauren embodies the character wonderfully as this creative, strong-willed, and maternalistic badass who was modeled after a combination of different characteristics from Leone's two older sisters. For anyone who thinks that Leone is some super messed up dude because of the content of his movies, Sienna's name came from watching Bob Ross for his whole life, and he named her after a paint he often used called Dark Sienna.
And then I'm going to add just a small amount of the Dark Sienna to the crimson.
Somewhat related to that, he's also on record stating that he can't handle real-world violence or things like medical shows, and that's something that I can absolutely relate with because I have no limit with what I can handle in movies, but my tolerance for anything real is extremely low. While Sienna gets a lot of credit for being super badass and having an awesome design for her costume throughout the third act, I don't think there's enough credit given to the borderline divine arc that she goes through as she comes face to face with Art. It's just not quite borderline, it is literally divine. I'm gonna dive really deep into a lot of the religious significance of what happens later on, but let's talk about the other characters some more first to get the proper context. Sienna's younger brother Jonathan is played by Elliot Fulham, who was a fan of the first movie, which I can only imagine must have made getting a lead role in the sequel an incredible experience. Jonathan is a bit of a social outcast who isn't all that good at reading the room and has a morbid fascination with serial killers, with his focus right now being on the fabled Art the Clown, who committed the Miles County massacre a year prior and whose body disappeared from the morgue that same night. I love Jonathan, and I think one of the things that makes his character work for me is that he doesn't feel like a cardboard cutout teenager obsessed with serial killers, and instead seems to be drawn to these things out of a fear of them. Like, if he spends enough time researching and understanding them, he'll have a better chance if he ever comes face to face with one. Which, despite me not personally being into, researching this kind of thing, I think is a more realistic portrayal of people who are drawn to watching documentaries about serial killers and things like that. He wants to dress up as Art for Halloween, which seems very messed up, but I think Sienna pretty much hits the nail on the head with her interpretation of why he wants this.
You think if he sees you wearing his costume, he'll be all cordial with you?
Also,
you don't see people dressing up as Jeffrey Dahmer or Charles Manson.
Yeah, this was filmed in 2019. About that, Elliot's performance also lends a lot of sympathy to the character, really selling him as this awkward teenager who's trying to find his identity after losing his father, who is a very important character that we don't have all the pieces for yet. Jonathan and Sienna's mother, Barbara, is played by Sarah Voigt, who, like Jonathan, I think has made a solid character in the story because she sort of fits into the archetypal mean mother, but there's more nuance to her character that stops her from feeling generic or like fodder for the gore. The Shaw family lost its father figure, and now Barbara has been left to try and pick up all the pieces and care for her two children while also working all the time and having to grieve her husband at the same time, and the result of this is that she's constantly exhausted from everything she's juggling.
Between your chemicals and your heat guns and staying up till 4 o'clock in the fucking morning doing God only knows what.
She was also based off of someone in Leone's life, that being his own mother, who was also a single parent trying to raise children while working constantly and doing everything she can to keep the loose ends tied up. Part of the effect of this is that Sienna has had to take on the motherly role for Jonathan in a lot of ways, where he'll confide in her before their mother because of how much more present Sienna is, which allows her to put more mental energy into really listening to him, which goes a very long way. There's a lot of strain in the family, which makes sense under these conditions, and most of the the time when Barbara is around, things turn into a fight, but there are a few moments of levity that go a long way for making these feel like more believable relationships and also build up some strong emotional connections between them. She doesn't come across as a cookie-cutter character to me at all, instead feeling like a mother who just has way too much on her plate right now and is putting all of her energy into just keeping her head above water. Sienna's friends Allie and Brooke are the other two prominent characters outside of the Shaw family, and while there isn't quite as much to talk about where they're concerned, as far as side characters go in slasher movies, they're very solid. These three don't blend together or feel too similar to one another, but it's also not hard to buy them as a friend group, and it's fun to watch them bounce off of each other. Brooke was played by Kaylee Hyman, who, according to Leone, was just electric to be on set with because of how well she understood the character she was playing. I was always really impressed with her performances, not because of any big scenes of terror or anything like that, but just because of how natural she feels during conversations.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I won't do it again, I promise.
Are you actually sorry?
Hey!
She doesn't read the room all that well and shows a serious lack of forethought or empathy when she decides that it's okay to dose her friend with Molly and then get mad at her for having a rough night. But she's still a fun character nonetheless. That being said, drugging someone is one of the lowest things you can do, and then getting mad at Sienna for not feeling great? Fuck you, Brooke! There is actually a cool narrative purpose for why Brooke does this, but I'll get into that when I break down her divine arc. Then we've got Allie, played by Casey Hartnett, and you know what one of my favorite traits of a person is? When you can tell how happy they are deep down by how genuine the smile on their face is. Look how much fun she's having. All dressed up for Halloween in a goofy little costume, it's so sweet. She's so compassionate too, you can really tell how much she cares about Sienna. This is the kind of person that deserves the best from life. Good friends, lots of smiles, a nice comfy bed to lay in at the end of the day. God, I hope Allie's good heart is recognized by the good Lord so that she may have a lifetime full of joy and prosperity, because that's what someone with a smile like this deserves. You just know that she'd give an arm and a leg, hell, the very skin off her back, to make sure that Sienna felt comfortable during these stressful times. She could be a little friendlier to trick-or-treaters, but no one's perfect after all, and everyone deserves a chance to grow, especially someone as kind as Allie.
You're really weird, you know that? Yeah.
Oof, I got a little carried away there. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, I suppose it's about time to talk about David Howard Thornton coming back to play Art the Clown for the second time following the recast from Michael Gianelli in All Hallows Eve. I actually think Gianelli did a pretty good job as Art in those earlier shorts, but it wasn't hard to see when Terrifier came out that Thornton was just on a completely different level. He was really great in that movie, but in my opinion, the performance he gives in this one completely overshadows pretty much everything that came before, save for the pizzeria scene, which is always going to be iconic for this franchise. While Art's insanely gory kills are what gets talked about the most when it comes to this creative little dude, the thing that I love the most about Art the Clown has nothing to do with the actual kills themselves, but instead in the moments when he's just messing with people. Art loves to goof around and play these silly little games before commencing any of the carnage, and this is where I find the most entertainment from him, largely thanks to that insane expressiveness that Thornton brings to the character without ever uttering so much as a word. I could genuinely watch a whole movie of these scenes with Art just being creepily hilarious and be totally entertained the whole time. The scene that's now become the most iconic non-death scene of the movie is when Sienna is out with Allie shopping for new angel wings to buy as a part of her costume since the last pair were burned, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. It is so insanely entertaining to watch Art fuck with them the whole time, tipping his hat to Allie because he recognizes how good of a person she is, basically saying, "Until we meet again, bonsoir," out of the hope that anyone would have that they could be around someone as positive and radiant as she once again. There was apparently a lot of footage of Thornton standing here just messing around with all the doohickeys, which were pre-selected by Leone and the set designers, and then placed there for Thornton to have free reign on what he wanted to use and what he wanted to do with it. And he unintentionally created one of the most iconic images horror has had in many years. So iconic, in fact, that there is now merch for it. There were a couple of happy accidents in this scene, another one being that Sienna's bag wasn't originally supposed to have been forgotten on the lower level, but they didn't realize the mistake until they were already filming the scene when she's with the cashier, but Thornton had the great suggestion that he could just walk up and slam the bag down next to Sienna, and that would be how the tension in the scene could be cranked up, which I think is a fantastic idea that absolutely made the scene even better, and is also a good example of how filmmaking really does come down to your ability to problem solve a lot of the time. They couldn't have the continuity error of the bag suddenly being with them, and the thing that was originally a mistake wound up being an opportunity for a great moment. I'm sure there's some profound lesson in there somewhere. I think my favorite sequence of Art being a goofy little guy is the interaction that he has with the cashier after Sienna leaves with her new wings. It really does just come down to the physicality in the performance, playing this scene, as Leone describes it, like an old lady who's taking way too long counting her change while getting on the bus and making everyone behind her wait. I love how he pops up here after piling all of this alarming equipment on the desk. I love how he looks when he's counting the change, which I think Leone described perfectly, and I especially love his reaction to the cashier slamming on the counter, where he perks up with this look of surprise on his face before twisting into this mischievous childlike expression. Something about these moments just tickles my brain, and I always get a good chuckle out of it, and it's one of the main appeals that this movie has. Art isn't only a great villain because of the physical performance though. A lot of it really does come down to the design that Leone has been iterating on since 2009, and it only gets better every time we meet the character. The makeup is quite a step up from the first movie, but it's also in the way that he's filmed that gives him so much more of a presence, especially with certain shots like this one towards the end where he's bathed in red light and looks about as hellish as can be. All of that being said, obviously there was no way I could make this video without talking about Art's thought process when it comes to the creative destruction of the human body, as my brother so aptly describes his escapades. A topic with which he is very well versed and could probably host a solid university course that would have those dudes from Bone Tomahawk nodding their heads in approval. One thing to appreciate about Terrifier 2 is it lets you know right off the bat what kind of movie you're in for, and it's also quite a statement to start off by having a dude's brain ripped out of his split open skull and his eye lodged into the recently emptied socket of his killer. If that's how we open, then you know it's gonna be an insane movie. Leone once again headed the practical effects for this movie, and not only is the technical side of them an improvement in terms of the quality of the effects themselves, but I also think there were a lot more memorable kills in this movie than there were in the first, where the only really notable kill would be the hacksaw scene, as it's been colloquially titled for obvious reasons. Now there's a bit more bluntness in that colloquial name than the big scene of this movie, and I think it's pretty damn impressive that if you say the bedroom scene, people immediately know what you're talking about, even if you didn't clarify that it's the one from Terrifier 2, which is quite the testament to the insanity of this scene, considering there are a hell of a lot of bedroom scenes in horror. It's a pretty common setting, but this truly is the bedroom scene. What's confusing me though is that everyone says the kill happens like halfway through the movie, but we're in Allie's house right now, and obviously nothing bad is going to happen to her because she's a happy-go-lucky glowing angel. It's not hard to see why this scene has become so infamous. This is easily one of the most drawn out, varied, and brutal kills that horror has ever seen, with Allie taking every sort of mutilation Leone's twisted mind could come up with. Well, probably not every one. I think if we saw everything that Leone could think of, there would be like, they'd need to build a couple extra mental hospitals. It goes on for a really long time, and it just never settles in or lets up, with Art constantly finding new ways to torment this poor woman as he gets his Sam-approved vengeance for not giving him candy earlier on. Truth is, Allie was dead either way, but according to the director's commentary, Art may have added an extra 1 or 2 embellishments because of her refusal. Not only is this an astonishing scene for the sheer brutality of it, but it's also a crazy thing to watch from an effects perspective. It wasn't originally as long as it wound up being, but delays from COVID set them back, and instead of taking that as a blow, Leone used it to just keep adding more and more to this insane sequence until it became the endurance test it is now. And Casey Hartnett should be commended for how grueling this whole thing must have been for her, with all the prosthetics and fake blood and the very cold temperatures with very little clothing to help out. There was so much fake blood, in fact, that she was having to peel herself off the floor every time she got up. There are many examples from the production of this movie that show how good problem solving can turn a setback into something really cool. That continuity issue with Sienna's bag being one of them, and the COVID delay during this scene's filming was another, since there's no question that the insanity of this sequence was a huge help in getting the film's widespread infamy. Another such example can be found just before this horrific scene plays out, and that's that the glass in this door wasn't originally supposed to be broken. Art was going to casually face tank through it when Allie went downstairs, and then he'd come back down mid-kill to grab a glass of water. water, but the pane was broken during delivery, so they had to adjust the scene to have Art already in the house and hydrating before his big performance. We also get another one of the creepiest shots of Art here with the way he looks at Allie and snips the scissors with such glee on his face before chasing her. Point is, I think there's a lot that can be taken from these setbacks and how they were worked around for people who are trying to get into these things themselves, and a good strong message that a setback can be a blessing in some cases if you're good enough at thinking things through. These are wholesome life lessons with Art the Clown. While this scene is definitely the most brutal of the movie, it unfortunately overshadows many of the others that would easily be some of the gnarliest in modern horror, with Brooke's death in particular being absolutely vicious, with Art throwing acid on her face and then going to town on her with this unsettling little arts and crafts project he was working on earlier. I like how the scene where we see him making this ties together the timelines of the first and second movie and gives returning to the first a fun new touch when you realize that this is actually the opening scene of the first movie and the little pale girl was there the whole time. We just didn't see her.
He's dead. I saw it happen.
These first two movies I find do feel pretty disconnected in a lot of ways, so details like this help out quite a bit. Another such detail is something that I actually missed when I did my video on the first movie, that being that the doll lady in the basement seems to actually be Emily Crane's mother, and she was driven insane after losing Emily to Art and now carries around this doll to fill the place of her daughter. Gives more purpose to a character who felt really pointless before. My main issue with that first movie is that it just feels really empty, so things like this that retroactively add context or significance to certain elements can help in making it feel more fleshed out. Anyway, the point is, the bedroom scene is always going to be the bedroom scene, but there are many other moments in this movie that would be far and away the highlights of other slashers, and it's a testament to the insanity of this scene that it managed to eclipse them in a discussion. There has been a lot of discourse about whether or not Terrifier is just gore for the sake of gore and nothing else. There's no question that the insane levels of gore are a huge focus in this franchise, and yes, it's largely there to push things as far as possible without making it so mean-spirited that it stops being fun to watch, which I think is a balance that's hit better in the sequel than it was in the first movie. One of the things that I just don't think gets talked about enough with the violence is how much it builds up the evil of Art the Clown. When you spend the whole movie watching him commit these absolutely disgusting, horrifying acts to people, it makes the third act where Sienna finally fights back against him and whips his ass one of the most cathartic final acts I can think of in a slasher movie. Granted, a lot of that is also because of the payoffs and the religious arc of the movie, but a lot of it is just also because of how far we've seen Art go throughout the course of the movie. Is the violence played for shock value? Of course it is, but there's nothing wrong with that being the case because it's just the adrenaline of feeling like you're engaging with something you're not supposed to be seeing, sort of in the same way that people ride roller coasters to feel that sort of extreme sensation without being in any actual danger. Well, ideally. It's fine if this isn't your thing, but there's nothing inherently wrong with watching it. Doesn't make you a violent person in the same way that riding a roller coaster doesn't mean you want to be in a car crash. I do think that the level of sheer brutality on display adds a lot of catharsis into the final confrontation, so at least from my perspective, it does serve as more than just shock value and actually adds substance to the story. The more heinous and awful things you see someone do, the better it feels when they get their ass kicked. All that being said, my issue with the violence in Terrifier has absolutely nothing to do with a delusional superiority complex. The downside that I see to it is that it's really all that's discussed when it comes to these movies. With the first Terrifier, I can understand why that's the case, since there really isn't much going on with it. Yeah, you get like the nice old school grindhouse atmosphere that can be talked about, but you know.
That was the longest piss I've ever taken.
But anytime I see someone say that Terrifier 2 is nothing more than gory shock value, it bothers me on a level I'm frankly embarrassed to admit to, because there is so much more to this beast than the practical effects, and those are the things that have kept me so engaged with this franchise and where it's heading. And that's what brings me to the thing that makes Terrifier 2 one of my favorite horror movies. The divine arc of Sienna Shaw and Art the Clown. To set the stage properly, we need to begin by talking about Sienna's father, who we have yet to meet as of the second movie. There are many hints though that can help clarify some things about who he was and what his role in all of this is. One of the two items that helps get us a better idea of him is the sketchbook that Jonathan has been holding on to, which depicts these drawings of significant parts of Art's massacres, including victims that no one was around to see, drawings of the man himself that are far more accurate than the police sketch, and also an image of an adult Sienna wearing the costume that she's been working on for Halloween, this being where she had the idea for it. One of my favorite little details in the movie is during our introduction to Sienna following Art's meeting with the little pale girl and the opening credits, where we find Sienna working on this costume. The song that's playing is called The Equalizer by a synthwave band called The Midnight, and the prominent lyric of the song, as well as the subtitle for it, is "You're Not Alone," which I think is really interesting considering this plays during a sequence where Sienna is crafting a costume that she found in a sketchbook from her late father, and from what we can glean through the information we have so far, he was a very significant role in making sure Sienna would be able to take on Art the Clown. So here we have her crafting her armor with something of her father standing there with her. She's not alone. The things that we know about the patriarch of the Shaw family is that he had a brain tumor which caused a huge behavioral shift, resulting in him becoming abusive with the family, raving on about things that would put him in a mental hospital, and he eventually drove into a transformer and was killed by the flames. Here's what I think about what's going on here. I think that Sienna's father, for some reason, was used as a conduit for guiding Sienna through her divine test that she needed to pass in order to be able to take down Art, who, for the sake of this discussion, can essentially be seen as a cosmic evil only able to be killed under very specific circumstances. Something larger than life showed him these visions of Art's ascension, which he sketched out to keep a record of. Then, somehow, he came into possession of this dagger, which is the second very important piece to this strange puzzle, and he made sure that Sienna got the dagger before he died. We can't say one way or another whether he knew what any of this meant or if he was simply going along with it because he could tell that he needed to, but the final thing we do know is that he had a brain tumor, which I don't think is just a coincidence. It could be two things. Either his connection to this divinity brought with it ties to the dark entity taking its form in the little pale girl, and that horrible evil manifested itself physically as a tumor in his brain because no mere mortal can harbor such energy. Or it's the cost of aiding the divine, like a sacrifice that has to be made for the greater good. I'm sure we'll learn more about him in the future, but from the information that I've been able to pick up on, those are some of the theories that I have about this mysterious character. Now we need to talk briefly about Art the Clown because, as I said at the start of this video, the movie picks up in the settling dust of something very significant taking place. Throughout the first movie, there are no hints of Art being supernatural until the final scene when he comes back to life, and the assumption was that he's just an immortal killer and was that way the whole time and we just didn't know it. The truth is, Art seems to have actually been human until that final scene, and his resurrection was thanks to the little pale girl, and it's only after this resurrection that he transcended humanity in a way, which is why there's so many more supernatural elements in the sequel. The point is though, when this movie starts, Art is no longer in a full human form, and with the little pale girl by his side, he can't truly be killed because she can simply resurrect him, and to make matters worse, it seems that he grows further away from that human body each time she does it, presumably becoming more and more dangerous in the process. The whole point of Art's resurrection and his guided massacre of those close to Sienna is that the entity is aware that Sienna is being tested as the only person who can truly kill Art the Clown. So to prevent her from going through this test of courage and strength, it's trying to break down her willpower by taking out those close to her. At the beginning of the movie, Sienna, like Art was at the start of the first movie, is human. They clearly both have some intrinsic connection with whatever is pulling the strings on both sides, since the little pale girl was drawn to Art and Sienna has been eyed as his potential adversary for her whole life, but in terms of them individually, they are both human at this stage. The first step in putting Sienna on the path to taking on Art the Clown is testing to see if she really does have what it takes before truly pitting them against each other, and that test comes in the scene that so many people say should have been cut from the movie, but is one of the most pivotal and important sequences. This is not a dream. It's, forgive me for this description, please, a divine test from some outer being manifesting as a dream in her head. Now, that's not to say the scene couldn't have been cut down a bit. Hell, this movie would have been helped by another editor in basically every scene, with most shots lingering longer than they need to or cutting back to something one too many times that don't add much. The pacing could have been helped by cleaning those things up for sure, but this scene absolutely cannot be cut from the movie. I'd imagine part of the vitriol towards this scene is a result of the blowback from everyone around you when you can't get that goddamn song out of your head. Drop on by the Clown Cafe, your favorite meals on wheels. The menu is disgusting and it's full of special deals. Nothing here is good for you, so grab yourselves a tray. 'Cause food's a little funny, Food's a little funny. Food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. The whole thing is designed to just terrify Sienna, to push her to the limit with this nightmare playing out in front of her before her willpower is fully tested. That test comes in the form of the Art Krispies box, which is full of all sorts of nasty things that cut her hand up all to shit, but she seems to somehow be aware that what she needs to fight back against Art is buried in there somewhere. So despite all the pain and fear, she keeps digging until she pulls out the dagger and blocks the fire with it, proving her worth. We then see that the dagger basically absorbed the flames and caught on fire in the real world, essentially baptizing it and awakening its dormant divinity that now has a proven warrior to wield it. That awakening in the blade is reflected by the faint light following Sienna's hand as she wipes it down, and we can see later on that it's faintly glowing. Sienna passed the test and gave her weapon the power it needs, and she's now proven that she is capable of taking on this challenge. The imagery of her angel wings burning in the flames of a divine baptism is so goddamn cool, man. Now, if the little pale girl knows that Sienna is capable of this, then why doesn't Art just kill her before her ascension later in the movie? Well, that ties into a sequence much later on where Sienna sees the Clown Cafe in the basement of the Terrifier, but once again, I have to refer to something from the director's commentary. For reasons unknown to us at this point of the story, Art can only kill Sienna in this grave, which Leone calls the Hell Portal. So he has to actually get her there before he can do anything, which is why he baits her into the carnival at the end of the movie. We can see him looking frustrated at one point after he beats her into submission because he's not actually able to do anything to her yet. Going back a bit, Sienna getting ready for her outing on Halloween night is a sequence that Leone has had in mind for the character since 2008, and it's essentially her prepping for battle, even if she doesn't fully know it yet. Leone wanted to build Sienna up to be at her highest and most euphoric state before diving into the pits of hell, which is why he had Brooke dose her with Molly at the party. She gets to share a moment of love with her mother before she never gets to see her again, which is a moment that's really important for both of their characters since we've mostly seen arguments in the family up until now.
I don't say it enough.
I love you too.
I really like how grounded this moment between Barb and Sienna is, and in a movie with so much violence and mayhem, it's refreshing to have such a sweet and honest scene between these two, even if it's incredibly bittersweet since Barbara is killed by Art not long after. Back to Sienna's journey here. The most significant event of the movie is, once again, when we return to the Clown Cafe. When Art pushes her into the Hell Portal, she's basically trapped there in her own personal hell, which manifests itself as the Clown Cafe from her test earlier on. The thing is, the blade that dealt what would have been the killing blow is the very same one that was given to her by whatever divine being has been pulling the strings this whole time, and it's been assigned to Sienna since she proved her worth with it, and so it can't actually harm her, which is why the wound that was inflicted by it heals as the powers that be resurrect her. And when she climbs out of the Hell Portal, she's now ascended her humanity in much the same way that Art did at the end of the first movie. She's now on the same playing field as him, and is able to finally take him down by chopping off his head with the blade, and I absolutely love how Art looks at her almost like he's saying, "All right, I see you." And he also looks so excited to have a real showdown. That religious arc that Sienna goes through of passing a divine test, baptizing a holy blade in fire, and then having that blade heal her wounds and resurrect her, lifting her to an ascended plane, and having the third act essentially be the symbolic battle between a Valkyrie risen from the grave and a being of pure evil who learns to respect his adversary is just, it's so fucking cool. I know that sort of symbolic storytelling isn't something that everyone loves, so I can see why a lot of people didn't connect with this side of the movie, but for me, this all works so well, and I love how engaged it's keeping me in reevaluating the story as time has gone on. The religious imagery and significance of all of this is something that's very uniquely presented in this movie, and I think it's a huge shame that this aspect of the movie has been overshadowed by the gore that's really just an embellishment to me, and this is what makes me the most excited to see where things go in the future of this franchise. Sienna has become my favorite modern final girl by a country mile, both thanks to this really cool symbolic storyline and the simple nature of her character being such a sympathetic, unique, and engaging lead who's wonderfully brought to life by Lauren Levera, who seems to have almost been building up to play this role, as the photos we see of a young Sienna wearing wings are actually Lauren when she was younger, and she offered to use this photo in the movie. Terrifier 2 ends with the little pale girl appearing once again and carrying off Art's head, and in a post-credit scene we watch as this entity possesses Victoria's body and uses it to rebirth Art's head. It's a bizarre and really fun conclusion that is so unabashedly cheesy, and that fun blend of divine storytelling with cheesy horror fantasy is one of my favorite things about this movie. Terrifier 2 is just such a strange, unorthodox slasher movie blended in with 80s fantasy, and despite the length of this video, I haven't even really gotten into every detail about why I love it so much. I definitely think that an editor would have been very much welcomed and could have helped in making the third act move quicker, which is usually where I hear people say the movie starts to drag a lot. For me personally, I'm so into the vibe of it that I never find that it drags, but I can definitely see what people mean by this. Another thing to touch on is just the strangely comforting aesthetic of this movie with the soft teal and orange look that evokes the Halloween season wonderfully. The whole damn movie looks like staring at a pile of raked leaves. It's awesome. It's still got that indie film look to it that gives it a nice charm, but it's absolutely a step up from the presentation in the first, even if some people prefer the overall aesthetic in that movie, which is fine. I know this video is probably as bloated to some people as the actual movie is, but I'd be remiss to not talk about the score from Paul Wiley, which is absolutely phenomenal and one of the most unfairly unsung soundtracks in a long time. It captures that old school 80s synthwave vibe that fits the tone perfectly, updating the themes from the first movie and introducing some new motifs that are just fantastic. My two favorites being Terrified to Tears for its foreboding and ominous synth loops that makes me smell fall in the air, and the track simply titled Sienna, which tragically doesn't appear in the movie, and I really hope it makes it into Terrifier 3 or a later entry because it's awesome. It's quite a different vibe to the other music, using completely different instrumentation and serving a purpose that most of the soundtrack doesn't by giving a powerful theme to a character who goes through a powerful arc. Please get this in there somehow. It deserves its place alongside the story. Didn't know where to put this part? I love when Art slaps this kid's hand for trying to double dip from his DIY Halloween candy bowl. Respect the rules, little dude. I swear to God, I could make like an entire video just going over these little like mannerisms in Art's performance. It's so good. Aside from what I see as the movie's overlooked narrative, Terrifier 2 is just a really goddamn fun time as a seasonal slasher movie with wonderful fall vibes and an old school presentation that makes me feel all warm and nostalgic. The blowing leaves everywhere, the color palettes, the sets, and that score go such a long way to building up the atmosphere that has made this an essential annual viewing in October for me. The Terrifier attraction used an actual haunted house, which was a huge help for the production since there's no way they could have afforded to build all this in the budget they were working with, and it's just awesome. Terrifier 2 is a wild movie that I feel like doesn't get enough credit for a lot of the things that it does really well. I can talk about all this in detail, but at the end of the day, this is just a damn fun piece of slasher escapism with a cozy fall tone, a story that goes a hell of a lot deeper than it appears to on the surface, a really fun cast of characters to follow along with, and some of the best kills that any slasher movie has to offer. I've never not had a fun time watching this beast, and I'm so glad that it was as successful as it was because of all the good things that means for indie filmmakers, horror lovers, and of course, those directly involved with its production. It's a massive win for everyone, and I'm really excited to see Terrifier 3 very shortly. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.